Hello, my name is Dr. Christine Bishara, and today I'm doing part 2 of a series of interviews that I'm doing with HG Tudor, who's a diagnosed narcissistic psychopath, and I'm looking forward to interviewing him again today. If you haven't already seen it, please take a look at part 1 of our video on narcissism. We discuss a lot of really interesting topics related to narcissistic personality disorder. Thank you, HG, for joining me. Maybe you can introduce yourself.
Thank you, Christine. Thank you for inviting me back. Pleasure to be here. Yes, as Christine has mentioned, my name is HG Tudor, which is a pseudonym that I operate under. I protect my identity to ensure that I can remain effective in what I do in my private and professional lives. I'm a diagnosed narcissistic psychopath, and I write and talk extensively about what it is to be a narcissistic psychopath and how my kind operate and function, and letting you know more about the world in which we operate and our various perspectives on the world, so that you gain a better understanding in order to help yourself, should you be involved with us, and also to satisfy the curiosity that you may have about our kind and scratch those particular itches.
Sounds good, HG. And I want to also mention that you've divided narcissists into 4 specific types, the lessers, the mid, and the graders, which is different from the DSM. And we discussed that in our first interview.
Yes.
Just to kind of summarize, you identify the graders as aware narcissists, which is a rare kind of narcissist. And
that's
then,
correct.
Right, the lessers and the mid-rangers, they're the more common. Lessers are more obvious, so they're bold and brash and belligerent, like you say, so their behavior is very obvious to someone. I do want to focus on the mid-rangers today because not only are they the most common type of narcissist, according to what you mentioned, but they're the hardest to spot. And I want you to talk a little bit about why that is, that they're the hardest to spot, but also for people who aren't aware that they're dealing with a mid-range narcissist, what are their things to look for? Are there specific things that they do differently from the other types of narcissists? So I'd love to hear your feedback on that.
Certainly. One mustn't lose sight of the fact that my kind are predators. Why are we predators? Well, we regard people as what they can do for us, whether that's consciously or unconsciously. We see, either consciously or unconsciously, people as prey. They're there to provide us with the prime aims, there to be controlled, to provide us with our lifeblood, which is fuel, to provide us with character traits, which we utilize for ourselves to enable us to fit in and to gain control over other people, and the residual benefits, which covers a whole host of things, ranging from provision of great sex, a roof over our head, somebody to give us our medication, someone to provide money to us, somebody that might look after us when we're unwell, give us access to networks, and a whole host of things besides. And everything that a narcissist does is geared around the prime aims. So the narcissist isn't interested in you because you're intelligent. The narcissist isn't interested in you because you've got gorgeous bee-stung lips. The narcissist isn't interested in you because you just happen to be brilliant at cooking. Yes, those are things that the narcissist can make use of, but we're not inherently interested in you because of who you are. We're interested in what you can provide to us. And so we're predators that feed off you by pulling the prime aims from you, by controlling you, drawing fuel, getting those character traits and residual benefits. And the most successful predators are the ones that are able to lay their hands on their prey the most often with the easiest of capture, the easiest method of ensnarement, and are able to have a range of prey that they can feast upon. So we briefly mentioned the lessers. And because they're more obvious in their behaviors, they tend to be a little more red of tooth and claw. They tend to be bolder. They tend to be brash. They tend to boast. They tend to be particularly haphazard. So after a period of time, people start to steer clear of them. Now, for them, they can then move from one watering hole to another. So that if they find in a particular town, everybody thinks, well, he's a bit of an arsehole, he's a womanizer, he's always getting in bar fights, he can't hold down a job, and basically the populace generally knows that's about him, he's forced to move elsewhere. So that predator is driven away from that watering hole and has to go and find a new one. But often they do, because there's plenty of watering holes in the world. And he moves on to the next town. The mid-range narcissist has the advantage of being able to hang around at the watering hole looking like all of the other animals that are there, and doesn't stand out as an immediate predator, and therefore has evolved in that way to become more effective by blending in and appearing like the victim, appearing to care through cognitive empathy, appearing to behave in a manner which is kind and helpful, so that they operate the facade of helpfulness, or they operate a facade of being a cheerful, happy-go-lucky soul that people are attracted to, or a facade of superiority, whereby he's a cocky so-and-so, but he is very good at what he does, and you just can't help but like it because he has that inherent charisma and ability. So the predators that we are, we want to get close to our prey. And if we come running and screaming with neon lights and klaxons to the watering hole, our prey scatter and run away and make life more difficult for us. And our narcissism has evolved to want the maximum buck for the minimum spend. And so the maximum bang for its buck, rather. And so it operates in an efficient way. And the way that the mid-rangers have evolved is they are much more likely to fit in, and that they obtain their prey by being much more like their prey, by appearing empathic, by appearing kind, appearing compassionate, mirroring those particular traits. So mid-rangers are more proliferate. There's a greater proliferation of them as a consequence of the fact that they've become more successful at blending in with their prey, meaning they've got greater access to that prey. And therefore, they are harder to spot. Now, graters are also very hard to spot, but what tends to allow a greater to be spotted is their sheer occupation in the stratosphere. That the elevation to which they've climbed, you think, well, in order to get to that position, you're going to have to be pretty self-obsessed and trampling on people beneath you. So they kind of stand out in that way, albeit hugely charismatic and likable. But often people don't tend to have that much to do with the graters because they do occupy that rarefied stratosphere. And it's the mid-rangers that more people have involvement with, and there are a greater number of them. And it's because they move amongst you far more readily.
Very interesting. And it kind of makes me think of the like survival of the fittest type phenomenon, where the mid-range kind of learned, right, to be able to fit in a little bit better. And I know you call them fake empaths because they, they are like chameleons. So, it kind of reminds me of what you had mentioned in our first interview, which is that the fake empaths, or at least when you have a narcissistic predisposition, whether it's genetic and coupled with a lack of control environment, you're either going to become a narcissist or normal or an empath. And it kind of makes me think, I wonder what it is. Is there some kind of trigger that makes one person who grew up in that environment with that genetic predisposition turn into a narcissist versus an empath? And there might not be an answer to that. I'm just curious if you've kind of come across anything that might, suggest one or the other.
There, as you know, the creation of a narcissist comes from that genetic predisposition allied with a lack of control environment. And there are particular factors that are more likely to create a mid-range narcissist than there would be in relation to a lesser. And they are largely environmental factors. I'm not going to say any more about that at this juncture because I'm working on a series about the various, how both the empath and the narcissist, the environment and genetic predisposition, what it is that perhaps causes the different flavor of empath or narcissist to arise. But what I will say is that when it comes to the creation of the mid-ranger, part of the reason that they become mid-range is linked to the environment in which they find themselves. Ditto with the lesser. So you will always find outliers, but in general terms with the lesser, you're looking at a more out and out abusive environment, so that they don't acquire the polish that is seen with the mid-ranger. And it's all about, they might find themselves in an environment where it's bullying, where it's, you've got to be, you're told at the age 11, you know, you're a man now, and they've been told before all of that, you've got to fend for yourself, you get your retaliation in first. And it's those rather obvious behaviors, that domineering environment that's not supportive, positively caustic, bullying and unpleasant, that leads more to the creation of a lesser. With a mid-ranger, you're more likely to get that environment of where the environment is one of supposed support, but not a grade B environment, for instance, being told you should have scored 3 goals rather than the 2 that you did. Why didn't you come first in your examination rather than 5th, and so forth? And of course, part of where the narcissism creates, it will mirror what it sees. So where you have that bullying, brash individual, you're more likely to have a narcissist that's created from a bullying, brash environment that becomes a similar narcissist. Not always, but more likely. And similarly with a mid-range narcissist, the mid-range narcissist that is emotionally distant from them, but maintains a facade to the outside world of being kind and decent, the child narcissist in effect mirrors and replicates that environment for themselves and follows the precision of a facade when they become a narcissist when they're older. So there is a significant environmental factor that's applicable, and that both goes with the creation of empaths and narcissists, and I have a series that's going into that in greater detail.
That makes sense what you say, and I'm looking forward to seeing that series, and I think it'll be very enlightening. You know,
Thank you.
You mentioned that the graders are aware, and
yes.
Curiosity is this. What if a lesser or a mid-range becomes aware, you know, is told by someone just based on their behavior that, you know, I think you're a narcissist? Do they then automatically become a grader or not? Curious.
They don't. The fact is, the lesser or mid-range narcissist sits there mired in their own blindness as to what they are, cruising through life completely oblivious. So the lesser basically is that wrecking ball, whether they're lower lesser, middle lesser, upper lesser A, upper lesser B. They just do what they want without due regard. And hey, you don't like it, there's the door. This is just the way that I am. And they don't see any problem with that. With your mid-rangers, they of course believe that they're decent people. And how on earth could they be a narcissist? I care about you. I do all of these things. I'm involved in charities. You know, I coach the children in football, point to all of these behaviors to support the fact that they're not a narcissist. So the lesser just thinks, hey, you know, you've got to get through life the best you can. That's it. They don't think any more beyond that. And the mid-ranger, they invariably think that they're decent people. So neither of those groups know that they're a narcissist. But if you come along and sit them down and say, well, hello, Mr. Middle Lesser, you realize that you're a narcissist, he's more likely to perhaps scratch his genitals and look rather puzzled and go, what be one of them then? And not actually comprehend what on earth you're talking about. Or quite simply, don't you be coming at me with these big dictionary words and swear at you, get out of here, because his narcissism will automatically reject it, because the suggestion that he's a narcissist is a threat to his control, and his narcissism will reject it. It won't cause him to go, maybe that's right. I maybe am a narcissist. That just won't happen. With the mid-ranger, what tends to happen is they will either reject the suggestion by saying, there's nothing wrong with me, you're the narcissist, and blame the victim and say that they are. And oh, here you are coming along with your psychology degree again, diagnosing me, saying that I'm the narcissist. Well, actually, I've done a bit of reading, Mrs. Cleverpants, and I've worked out that you're the narcissist. So don't you come in, because what you're doing is you're projecting, you see, and they immediately engage in their own projection, accusing you of projection. So their innate self-defense mechanism comes to their rescue once again and rejects the suggestion. Now, what you do get is with certain mid-rangers, and the ones that I call the mid-ranger that would be king, that believe that they are an aware narcissist, but they're actually not. And these fall into 2 distinct groups. The first of the ones, and I occasionally get them contacting me, almost sidling up to me in a conspiratorial manner, saying, HG, I'm just like you. And I think to myself, no, you're not. And they say, you know, I am this uber Machiavellian character. And if I question them about their supposed Machiavellian dealings, I'm met with vagueness and deflection, because they can't detail anything, because they're not. Yes, they're manipulative in the way that an unaware mid-range narcissist is manipulative, but they think that they're aware and they're not. So they think they are a greater, but they're not, which means they still remain an unaware narcissist because they don't know what type they are. The second group and these are probably the most dangerous for genuine victims, are those narcissists who are unaware, but think that they are aware, I beg your pardon, and that they're healing or that they've healed. And that they come along and they say, I know that I'm a narcissist and I've worked on myself and I've conquered my narcissism. I've owned it and I'm a better person. No, that is just the narcissism talking through them, claiming to make them a better person in order to assert control over that victim, to draw them in by thinking, oh, look, he's done the work on himself and he's become cured. The narcissism won't let that happen. The narcissism, in effect, is almost conning the host by making the host think that he is cured, so that he can say to people, I'm either, yes, I'm a narcissist, but I'm working through the issues and I'm making the changes and I want to be a better person. That's just the narcissism speaking. It's not genuine, and it's just another manipulation. And those individuals, and you find some of them popping up on YouTube, are particularly dangerous because they send out a message to people to suggest that an unaware narcissist can suddenly become aware and that they can somehow, in effect, become better and cure themselves. They don't. All they're doing is continuing to manipulate you, continuing to con the victims, and they're doing so by creating this appearance and image that they've somehow done the work and improved themselves. So they cannot become aware. And where there are instances that you think that they might be aware, they're not, for the reasons that I've just explained.
So you're saying it's more of a manipulative tactic to try to convince.
It's an unaware manipulative tactic because they don't realize it's a tactic. I, for instance, because I'm aware, what I could do is I could say, great news, Tudorites. I am cured of my narcissism. I've been seeing the good doctors for umpteen years, and they've now declared to me that I have got my narcissism under control, that I don't need to devalue anybody, and I've been with this lady now for a number of years, and there's never been any problems. I know that I'm lying because I'm an aware narcissist, and I potentially could do that for the purpose of manipulating my audience to say all of those things, okay? But I'm not going to, because I have no interest in doing that. You get the unaware mid-range narcissists who believe that they've changed, who believe that they're cured, that they believe that they've been working on themselves, but it's just their narcissism talking through them, causing them to say all of that in order to do what? Assert control of their audience by thinking that they've improved and they've become better, drawing fuel from everybody's response. Well done. That's great that you've achieved that. I'm so pleased that you've done so. It gives me hope for the situation with my husband, with my wife. It allows the acquisition of character traits, and of course, there's the residual benefits that come with it. It's just the continued manipulation of an unaware narcissist.
So are you saying that there isn't a cure for any narcissist, even with long-term therapy? Because I have heard that long-term, many years of therapy, that they're not cured, but they're able to kind of at least recognize certain behaviors and, you know, switch them or at least work on them. You're saying no, like it's all manipulation.
Even that remains a manipulation because the narcissism is inherent. The narcissism doesn't go away. Yeah. All that happens is the nature of the manipulation alters. So it moves from. I remember.
Yeah.
Whenever a narcissist has an interaction, it's about the prime aims. It's not about out of the goodness of our heart, or it's not founded on emotional empathy. You can't inject emotional empathy into somebody who hasn't got it. So as you know, when I'm talking to you, Christine, and I'm being polite, professional, and courteous, I'm not doing it because I'm inherently polite, professional, and courteous. I'm doing it because I recognize as a narcissist that's the most effective way for me to control you, draw fuel from you, etc. So that's why I behave in that way. I recognize it. Now, you don't suffer a downside because you don't feel manipulated, you don't feel controlled. You're thinking, well, we're having a conversation, of course, this interview, that's all good, it's all interesting, and it's a win-win, fair enough. However, where the narcissist might shift their, if I could call it, their skill set, whereby previously they engaged in behaviors which were more vitriolic, but they then move to an alternative outcome. They're still manipulating, but they're doing it in a different way. Now, some people will say, well, that's a gain. Rather than him slap me, he actually just sits down and has a circular conversation with me. He's still being manipulated. Or rather than him shout and scream at me, now, when he recognizes he's on the cusp of doing that, he goes off and goes and does something else. Well, he's still asserting control over you by withdrawal.
Right.
Because his narcissism needs to get that. So he's still getting what he needs. It's just that the behavior is shifted. So what you might be able to do is modify the narcissist's behaviors, but you're never going to get rid of the narcissism because it's entrenched and pathological. Now, that's not to say that at the year 3510, there might be some discovery whereby some specific laser beam might be used on a part of the brain that alters it, and all of a sudden those entrenched pathological behaviors are wiped out, and you then are able to create some form of empathy, because we don't know what will happen in the future, but that's certainly not around the corner. Okay. And remember, narcissism is a self-defense mechanism. So if you're trying to intrinsically and inherently change the narcissist's behavior, what are you doing? You're threatening the narcissist's sense of control. So the narcissism is going to fight against it. It's a little bit like if you have got purple spot disease and a doctor comes towards you with a syringe which will cure it, the nature of your purple spot disease makes you run away out of the doctor's surgery because it recognizes that's a threat. So it causes you, the host, to depart, so you can't be cured of it. The narcissism operates in the same way. There is no cure, and even if there were, the narcissism's not going to let the narcissist be exposed to it unless the narcissism sees that there's going to be a benefit in doing so. So why did I engage with the good doctors? Because my narcissism dictated that it would enable me to control them, draw fuel from them, and moreover, gain the residual benefit of making me more dangerous than I already am by learning more about me. That's why I went there. I didn't go there to get better in terms of be cured. I went there to become more effective, and I wanted to learn more about myself because I'm a fascinating individual.
You definitely are, HG. It's a little bit scary hearing you say that. Well, and so you mentioned empathy, and
yes.
We know narcissists do not have empathy. I mean, narcissistic individuals have a little bit, but I'm curious because there's emotional empathy and there's cognitive empathy. And, you know, I think like, especially with the mid-rangers or the graders, there's that cognitive empathy where you can actually understand over time by learning how people behave when they're empathic versus emotional empathy. Can you talk a little bit about the two and kind of differentiate them and you know, just kind of give a little bit of clarity on the two?
Certainly. So emotional empathy is, as you've just indicated, is something that's found in empathic people, normal people, and even narcissistic, but not narcissists. And that means that you have a range of empathic traits, being a love devotee, compassion, moral compass, decency, honesty, caring, truth seeker, and others. And that emotional empathy regulates you in an unconscious fashion. You don't have to think about it. You just do. Now, occasionally you will think about your actions in terms of, that person might not like it if I behave that way, so perhaps I won't do it. Or, well, I found this wallet in the street and it's stuffed with money. If I lost my wallet, I would hope that somebody would return it, so I'm going to do the right thing. But a lot of the time, you're guided by almost like an invisible force. So you don't routinely just walk into somebody's house without being invited. You don't take food off somebody's plate without them offering you a taste or asking, could I try those dirty fries that you've ordered? And you operate instinctively from a place of emotion in terms of ensuring that you function in a method of exhibiting that emotional empathy. So what happens is it's an instinctive response and one that you don't have to think about. Whereas compared with ourselves, the narcissist, we don't have any emotional empathy whatsoever. And instead, what happens is it's an intellectual response effectively that we have. Now, some narcissists don't even have cognitive empathy, and those are the rudimentary lessers. And mid-rangers, greater, and I, the ultra, we have this learned intellectual empathy, whereby the way that our narcissism works, it has allowed us to watch what other people do and essentially go, okay, so in that situation, that means this, and therefore the appropriate response is that. So let's say, for example, you're walking down the road and Mrs. Miggins from number 24 lies there collapsed in the road. You, without hesitation, will run over to check that she's okay. You won't think about it. You will just do it, governed by your empathic trait of caring and decency. and you'll go over to check that she's well. I come walking along the road, and there's Mrs. Miggins from number 24 lying prone in the road. I see that she's lying down there and that she's old. I therefore work out, albeit quickly, she may well have suffered some kind of injury or ill health episode. That means she may well be in distress. That means that she probably would need some help. Therefore, should I give her that help? And I evaluate whether that would be worth my time doing so. And so I would evaluate, what will I gain from helping Mrs. Miggins? Well, I'm walking with my girlfriend. So in order to maintain my facade, if I help Mrs. Miggins will be grateful and she will give me fuel. It'll also bolster my facade and my girlfriend will give me fuel as well. And I'm not in a particular rush, therefore I'll help Mrs. Miggins. On another occasion, I'm on my own and I need to be somewhere else which I deem to be important. So it's not worth my while assisting Mrs. Miggins, even though I've worked out that she needs assistance. So I step over her and carry on my way. So the difference is that ours, with cognitive empathy, it's a learned intellectual response that basically our narcissism evaluates. Show me this circumstance. So, for instance, when I was very young, when I saw what I understood now to be crying, I didn't know what it was. And I asked my brother and sister, why is water leaking from their eyes? And they looked at me and laughed and said, that's crying, HG. And I said, why are they crying? They're hurt. So when you're hurt, you cry. Yes. So if I punch you in the face and that hurts you, that'll make you cry. Yes. And so I learned. And of course, all of these interactions, almost like a kind of supercomputer, the exposure that one has to it. And I've watched so many people, because I'm an observer as well, I watch the way that people behave in a certain scenario. So I know and understand that when you first meet somebody, you don't immediately grip them by their genitals. You shake hand, okay? That's the appropriate way to fit in. And that you make inquiry. How are you? I simply don't care how that person is. I've no interest in that. But I recognize that that's the appropriate response to fit in, and I can assert control over them by making an inquiry to their general health, and then they respond. So it's all learned behaviors, and it makes it look like I care, and it makes it look like I've got compassion, and it makes it look like that I love. But it's all learned. Now, I actually very quickly have that process going through my mind. In other instances, is instinctive. With an unaware narcissist, they've learned and it comes in instinctively. But their narcissism has effectively made that evaluation on their behalf and they're unconscious, because it doesn't come from a position of if you like, it's not an emotional response, it's a learned intellectual response. And that's the major distinction between the two.
So HG, you mentioned crying. So most people, non-narcissists, they see someone crying, it kind of emotionally affects them to a certain degree. What do you feel when you see someone crying? Does it, if there's someone close to you, do you get like, do you feel like it's powerful for you that you made them cry?
Well, if somebody's crying and it's nothing to do with me, it irritates me because that's wasted fuel. And I then have to try and keep my contempt in check because it's demonstrative of their weakness. They're weak, crying over something. What does that serve? What does that serve? What purpose does it serve to cry about the fact that you missed the bus or that somebody's rejected you? It's pathetic. So if I see somebody that they're crying and it's not occasioned by me, it's irritating. However, if I recognize that there's a purpose to be served, then I might say to them, oh dear, what's the matter? And of course, within, I have this odious contempt for them, but I can maintain the facade of saying to them, or the veneer, oh, what's wrong? Oh, my boyfriend's just left me. Now, my immediate thought will be, good, that gives me a better opportunity to seduce you now he's out of the way. But at that instant, I determine that's not going to be the appropriate response here. And the better thing is to basically offer some tea and sympathy. And so that's what will occur, if I deem it appropriate. In other instances, I may well be quite dismissive and say, well, that's too bad. I'm sure if you ring your sister, she'll be delighted to hear all about it. You'll have to excuse me. I've got somewhere to go. Because obviously, if I don't think there's anything in it for me, I'm not going to hang around pretending to care. I'll only pretend to care if there's something for it. Now, if I make somebody cry, that's negative fuel and it makes me feel powerful. because I've occasioned that reaction in them. Indeed, that negative fuel is more powerful than positive fuel because it's harder to make somebody angry and upset compared to making them happy. It's easy to make people happy. It's easy to make people joyful. But to get them to react with irritation, with frustration, with upset, with anger, and it's particularly satisfying watching somebody cry as a consequence of what you've done, because it reinforces my superiority over them by demonstrating their weakness. They're resorting to blubbing. And I hear all these things about saying, well, it's cathartic to cry, etc. Well, if you believe that and you draw something from it, good for you. But I don't. I see it demonstrative as weakness, albeit, of course, your tears are my fuel. So you can carry on weeping if I've made you. Indeed, if somebody's crying about something and it irritates me and I deem it's not appropriate to be supportive, I will say to them, what on earth are you crying for? So then they get upset that because I've been nasty to them, and then they're crying because I've been nasty. Good. Now it's my fuel. Now we're talking. Now we're cooking on gas.
Double fuel. Yeah, makes sense.